Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got Marisa Flood here, and she is a going to be a great guest for the audience for today. She's going to talk about communication, empathy, emotional intelligence, and how you can apply these concepts into individuals suffering from frustration in romance and their relationships. And she's got a lot of interesting insights to discuss. So I'm happy to welcome Marisa to the show. Welcome, Marisa.
Thank you for having me, Christopher. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so talk about your story and your background and how you got to be doing what you're doing and how the audience can benefit from your expertise.
Sure. So my origin story starts in my mid 30s. I was working on Wall Street and kind of running a lot of masculine energy and was really struggling in my relationships. And so I decided to kind of take a pause and figure out what was happening and what did I need to learn. And we don't rise to the level of our expectations, we fall to the level of our training. And I had no training, like most of us when we arrive in romantic relationships. So I spent a lot of years really upping my game and learning all the skills. And also, I realized that I had a lot of unresolved trauma, which is contributing to the unhealthy dynamics with my partners. So I did a lot of work to work on that as well. There are a lot of very common mindsets about, thinking our partner is the problem and kind of going into victim mode and projecting onto the other. And so it takes a lot of work to kind of move through that. So those two arcs kind of formed my relational recovery. And then I decided to offer that to others as well. And so my work is really about helping struggling couples interrupt those negative patterns of relating and really upskilling them with all the tools they need to have a healthy relationship.
Really interesting. And there's a couple of two things I want to unpack there because, a lot of the audience, they are very successful female executives. They're doctors, lawyers, dentists, entrepreneurs. Especially in today's technological age where people are getting married later, some are not even getting married, they're not having kids, this kind of whole definition. So talk about this, and you were on Wall Street too. So talk about this dynamic where your career and your profession, does it hinder your romantic relationships or can it help you? And what are your insights on that?
So that's a great question. And definitely, I think with every dream, there comes a price. And so
Hmm.
for me, it definitely did exact a toll on my work-life balance and my ability to show up as a resourced person in relationship. There's very high stress levels. It's very wearing on the nervous system. Many of these professions are very high stress. So not so well there. But we definitely have to maintain a professional demeanor in these environments. And so we're kind of forced to really bring on board more of our emotional intelligence to be successful in these environments. And so, we can't really throw our toys out of the pram, even if we want to, in some of these scenarios. So it really helps us to manage and take a look at, some of these stressful situations and how to best manage them.
Yeah, interesting. And so, kind of a follow-up question to that is, how do you reconcile this dichotomy between this kind of high testosterone, high stress career environment, and how is it conducive to roman? Is it how is it conducive to? So, for example, I just give you an example, and again, we're not touting any, but just there was a criticism, the Secret Service in Pennsylvania, they said, our, and again, this is not a just, we're just bringing these ideals up. And, Wall Street, you have, medicine, these very high stress, military, and, you know, is there room for emotional intelligence or is it just kind of just go, 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 testosterone fuel? I've seen
Yeah,
those.
great question. So really, and particularly in the military, the emotions are kind of trained out of you because you
Mm,
have to be so focused and be ready to hit your target and do what you have to do. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be very difficult then when you walk in the door from that environment and your partner is wanting you to be loving and emotional and soft and all of these things. So I think it works well in that the feminine really yearns for leadership and direction and decisiveness from a
Mm-hmm.
partner. But I
Yeah.
think the overall, one of the main complaints we hear from women is, I can't feel my partner. I want to hear more. I don't know what his emotions and feelings are. So it's a double-edged sword. And it's a journey that, each person has to go on. Typically, it comes to a crisis state, whether it's divorce or the threat of that,
Yeah.
to land in therapy and to start to look at, how am I showing up and what do I need to do to come back into balance? And I think for men, it's very difficult because the patriarchy doesn't do intimacy. It doesn't cultivate the kind of vulnerability and skills that modern day women are yearning for.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not an easy thing to address.
Yeah, it's almost like kind of a balance, and it's especially harder because it's society is kind of ingrained in this masculine. And I've talked to a lot of guests and clients. The women partner or the partner is just if they're feminine, they want to kind of separate. At work they have to be very masculine, but at home they want to be more feminine. And so there's this dichotomy that the audience has to be aware of. The next question, because you mentioned healing, you mentioned trauma in your opening segment, and what's interesting is I actually had an unhealthy relationship with career. I was kind of, and I've noticed the pattern, like women or men that get into unhealthy relationships, it's they kind of these unhealing trauma. So talk about how past trauma affects intimate relationships, and we'll go from there.
So there are two streams of trauma that we can talk about. The
Mm-hmm.
one that most people are familiar with is kind of more, severe trauma, whether it's sexual abuse or the death of a
Mm-hmm.
parent, kind of, severe shock to the system. But there's a
Mm-hmm.
whole other stream of what we call developmental trauma, and that is pretty much something that happens to all of us to one degree to another. And
Mm-hmm.
by the definition that my teachers use, it's any less than nurturing parenting. And so all of that leaves an imprint, and we end
Mm-hmm.
up adopting these compulsive set of behaviors that then
Yeah.
start to limit and control how we show up in our adult relationships. And and so there's a whole process that we need to move through because we've done these behaviors so long, we think they're who we are. They become part of our personality, when in fact we were not born this way. We just had to survive, and that's what we needed to do. But typically our
Mm-hmm.
partner is not interested in the way that we're showing up, maybe with control or manipulation or avoidance or clinging. All of these are, adaptive behaviors. That is trauma that has to be interrupted.
Interesting. And kind of, I know because you talked in a general sense, and I'll get into specifics, is, I'll just, to set the stage, kind of, for me, it was ingrained at a very early age that I would become a doctor. A doctor is like the only way to prosperity, financial success, happiness, etc. So, I cling to this. It's almost like, and then, for some people, it's like, for some women, it's like, they logically they understand that the infidel or the just kind of the bad persona is bad for them, but they are emotionally attracted to that because of these underlying dynamics. So how do you address this? Because it's like that the person that gets into the continually bad relationships, or the person that just kind of struggles in their career until they finally get it, that it's kind of like you have to let that go and kind of move forward. Talk about that.
Yes. And so I think that As humans, typically we don't change unless we absolutely have to. It's not
Hmm.
something that we are naturally, we jump into therapy and, address our issues. Usually it's that crisis. And
Hmm.
if there's a pattern of bad relationships, two and
Hmm.
three times over where you're attracting the same kind of person, the common
Hmm.
denominator is you. And
Hmm.
so, I went through some of this in my own personal life. I was attracting emotionally unavailable men, and I kept pointing the finger and pointing the finger until the
Hmm.
third guy. And I thought, okay, wait a minute here. This is becoming extremely painful.
Hmm.
And I need to stop and take a look at and take stock of what am I doing that's
Hmm.
contributing to this dynamic? How am I not emotionally available? And so it takes
Hmm.
work, and you have to, sometimes you need professional help to do that as well.
Hmm.
We can work out on our own, but typically we need somebody on our shoulder to help see exactly these patterns and how they're holding us back. And then the other one you mentioned about struggling in the career. We
Hmm.
might be getting messages in our career about our bedside manner or how we relate to people. And so it becomes, an imperative that if we want to
Hmm.
have our livelihood, we have to do something about it. And now I know that the professional audience that you have, they spent many years, studying, training, certifying. And
Hmm.
so typically, I'll just make a sweeping statement. This is not everybody, but their
Hmm.
focus on their emotional growth and development comes later in life
Hmm.
because they've had all this time that they've focused on their career. And so there is a little bit of a different journey there. But I think
Hmm.
that's one that we inevitably all need to face.
So, kind of a follow-up question to that is, because you mentioned struggling in relationships early on, and I'm curious, because now you're a certified coach, so you kind of this kind of quite a shift from the Wall Street. So, my question for you is, were you attracted to the Wall Street career because of the or was it just was it because of the trauma, or was that because that is something that you really wanted to pursue? And I'm just kind of, because I see two things. One was the relationships, the other is the career. So for me, I've always struggled in my career, kind of trying to redefine myself, because I never fit into the paradigm. So what is it for you?
So that's kind of an interesting story, and it has to do with my money blueprint. I know this
Mm.
podcast is about financials as well, and so
Hmm.
my blueprint when I was younger was that I saw the way my father had control of the money over my
Hmm. Hmm.
mother, and it became very uncomfortable to sit with this dynamic. And one day something in me snapped, and I
Hmm.
thought, I will always have my own money. And so I just quietly pursued being a six-figure woman and put things in
Hmm.
place to do that. And so that was kind of my trauma, again, driving
Hmm.
my life decisions, and
Hmm.
also being in having the ability to kind of be in a very masculine environment and soak up that testosterone. I'm not going to lie to you, that was part of the
Hmm.
draw as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because for me, it's because my parents were first generation immigrants, and it's just kind of like, I never want to be I never want to be beholden to a company or a corporation or a boss. It's always kind of entrepreneurship. Kind of in medicine was kind of like the setting stage, for success, and kind of setting you up. And for my wife, the same thing. She's like, she saw from her parents, same thing that you experienced, and she's like, yeah, she will always have her own finances, and not, because a lot of women are like, the men will take care of the finances, which is can lead to disaster. So
Mhm.
really interesting. Another follow-up question is, because you talked about healing, and the more and more I talk to guests about this, and it's like they start to set boundaries. So like for me, it was just leaving the profession, just kind of letting that go, and kind of saying no to these types of things that draw me back into that. And as you start to heal and kind of then you start to attract the right people? Talk about that.
Yes, so setting boundaries is part of the skill building part of healing from
Hmm.
trauma. Because
Hmm.
sometimes we might have people that are walking all over us, or we're the one that's kind of controlling others. So learning
Hmm.
boundaries are really important. And also building self-esteem, self-worth,
Hmm.
forming an identity that's not attached to our career.
Hmm.
There's so much performance-based esteem in the culture. Like you're
Hmm.
only as good as your last deal, your last surgery, whatever the success is. But what happens if that goes away? Are you no longer a valid person? That's not true. We are born inherent worth, and that's what we need to have a paradigm shift around.
Hmm.
Otherwise,
Hmm.
we're going to have a hole in us that keeps thinking that we need to do something outside of ourselves to esteem. So that's all in the skill building realm. And then the healing realm is going back and taking a look at, well, what happened to us that caused these decisions and behaviors and how we're showing up in relationship now? And
Hmm.
snapping the elastic back enough that we can start to unblend from
Hmm.
these behaviors that may not be working for us in our relationship. And
Hmm.
that is the process of healing from trauma. The trauma will never go away, but it's how we then relate to it. Over time, it has less and less of a hold on us, and we can
Hmm.
operate more from our prefrontal cortex because we've built new neural pathways of
Hmm.
relating instead of the trigger response that we have, you know, had in our nervous system for so long.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because, on my own healing journey, part of the biggest part was just saying no and just kind of, and what's interesting is that, and I've heard this from guests and clients is that as they start to, again, developing boundaries and heal, they start to attract the right partners and, their career starts to flourish. And they start to, move on from this, whatever traumatic over this crisis. I know we have around 5 to 7 minutes, and what's interesting is, our society is changing. We've got technology, we've got AI, we have robots coming, and it's just changing at this so fast. And what does this impact on relationships? Because now I see the modern family dissolving, the institution of marriage dissolving, people not having kids, people, in this epidemic of loneliness. So what is the impact of society and change on relationships? Are we doomed to be just, low? I know like, for example, in Japan, they actually have companies that you can hire a friend for the day, or, a lot of like the restaurants and establishments are just single seating only. So, talk about that.
Yes, this is a big question, and
Mm.
technology has taken very much a forefront in our lives now. Some
Hmm.
for the better, but
Yeah.
obviously it can be very much a distraction as well.
Mm.
So I think healthy couples set agreements around their devices and how they interact with them when they're around their partner, and having times where there's no devices and you're just have that ritual of connection.
Yeah.
When we hear about the reasons for divorce these days, one of the main reasons is literally, we drifted apart. And so
Mm.
what I hear is that there isn't that same intentionality that's being put on the relationship. And so a relationship is like a garden. It takes effort. It has to be tended. And part of that is keeping, the technology at bay if we find that it's interfering with the connection between you. You mentioned about, dissolving relationships and different things that are happening in the culture. Definitely, we see many more permutations arising. I think
Mhm.
that, we're in an era now where we can actually make our own decisions around what model of relationship we want. There's, a big rise in polyamory, and, maybe you want to be married but not live together in the same house. It doesn't have to look like what your parents did. You get to make your own decisions. So I think there's more freedom and how we can
Uh,
construct it, but also, the pressure of what's going on around us. And so the game is the inner technology. This is where we've fallen down in our development. External technology is, off the charts. The inner technology has not kept up. We have to 2.0 our operating system to
mm,
have that awareness, that consciousness, those boundaries, that inner work to, decide what do we want in our lives and how do we create that. I mean, the loneliness is a tough one.
mm.
Where everybody's on their device because they're looking for connection, and yet there's humans all around them that they're not speaking to at all. So it's
Yeah.
gone cattywampy. And, it's up to each of us to make those decisions on how we want to interact with the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, it's so interesting. And again, it boils down to intentionality. It's like, what do you want to get out of what do you want to put in? How are you going to construct the relationship? What do you want to get out of it? And, in this midst of just, huge change, just our, society is changing. If people wanted to, if the audience out there wanted to reach out to you and find out more about you, follow your social media, work with you, how would they do that?
Sure. My handle is conflict to connection with the number 2. So that's my website, also my Instagram channel. I have some free content on moving through conflict on my website. You can get some of that to get a taste of my work. And I also offer a free intro call for couples who are looking for a relationship coach. So that's where to find
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, interesting. And I really enjoyed this conversation. It was very deep, and I really enjoyed talking about the nuances. And for the audience, be sure to give Marissa's the socials a like and follow and reach out to her. And thanks so much for coming on.
Okay, Christopher, thanks for being here.